Never gonna stop this train racing down the line again. Raise your limit, touch the sky. We won't let this moment die. This is the ride, can't resist. In the night, we raise our fists. Feel the power, feel the heat. On the move, we can't be beat.
Beyond tragic. That's how I looked this morning, according to my personal trainer, after a long night out. He wasn't lying. I could see myself in the subway glass reflection heading to work. I wanted to bury my face into the bizarre puddle of brown liquid that seemed to be growing in size 2 seats over as we finally hit the DeKalb stop where I would have to switch trains. 15-minute delay. Shoot me now. Please. With a big gun. Aim for the face, so my beyond tragic look will be less easily identified by the nearby mourners. I worked in advertising, which meant I was slightly hungover. I had already missed my 9 o'clock meeting, was on my way to missing my 11 o'clock as well. The 9 didn't matter. It was filled to the brim with underlings and the head of creative, who was currently occupying the job I deserved. They would no doubt use this as leverage against me at some point in the near future. Currently, I couldn't think of anything I gave less of a shit about. This person, let's call him Carson, loved nothing more than a pissing contest. The only reason I even got an invite was so that Carson could show all the underlings how little my input mattered. Showing up to work an hour late is no reason to settle for the house coffee. I stopped into Blue Bottle. I don't do Blue Bottle. There's many other places I could have gone to in Midtown for a coffee, so why do it? Because Carson hated Blue Bottle, even more than I did. I was willing to swallow my pride and this tepid, overpriced caffeine if it meant Carson could snivel even louder than normal when he realized I was extra late because I was buying the coffee he despised. Suddenly, Blue Bottle tasted pretty good. If you think I'm being biased towards Carson, let me present Exhibit A from the evidence drawer that Carson is a king douche. The bandana. Carson wears bandanas, unironically, because he believes it makes him unique. The 11 o'clock meeting was for a pitch rehearsal. The drug was for rheumatoid arthritis. When you work in big pharma advertising, you need to make sure the angel on your shoulder stays hydrated, because the devil on your other shoulder, he's going to steer the ship any chance they can get. Did I have the occasional moment of second guessing due to the nature of my job? Yes, but they were increasingly few and far between. The money was good, and I loved living in the Upper West Side, Manhattan. Once every 6 months, I could tell someone how much I would love to quit my job for something with a stronger moral compass. My younger brother informed me that my most recent proclamation of switching careers had been a recurring bit for close to a decade, in fact. Apparently, we had this exact conversation many times before. Like Tyler Durden said, everything is just a copy of a copy of a copy. I couldn't tell you one memorable thing about that meeting, other than I was already planning my Irish exit. Carson would be out of the office by 4 p.m., which meant I would be out by 3:45. I wanted him to know I was gone first. The writing had been on the wall that Carson was trying to nudge me out so that after the inevitable merger with another advertising company, he would be promoted at the expense of those closest to his orbit, a.k.a. me. A younger version of myself would have tried to take the higher road. Ask Carson to grab a beer, hash it out, join forces. Younger me was gone. Current me wanted his job. A job I had settled into nicely during my last job, before the merger, when our titles got rearranged. I was no longer known as creative. I was now known as managerial. Nobody wants to grab a beer with the manager. The manager is the wet rag that feels like a vulture constantly circling in the sky. Everyone wants to grab a beer with the head of creative. You would pitch head of creative in subtle ways, always putting your best foot forward, dressed to impress. I didn't even last until 3:45. I was out of the office by 3:30. It was nice enough to walk, all 1 hour and 45 minutes of it, This would be my exercise for the day. The calendar had just struck October, so the weather was top-notch. Just enough of a chill to keep your motor healthy and humming. Every time I passed a bakery, I briefly dreamt of working there. How nice would it be to give someone a fresh blueberry muffin? Much better than giving them a pill that would no doubt be replaced by a new, better pill within the next 6 months. As much as I love a morning muffin to reset my moral compass, I had to be realistic. Was there a job I could sidestep towards that let me keep my apartment? The apartment that was just across the street from Central Park West? An apartment that made my dates swoon just when they saw the address. You can imagine their faces when they saw what the inside looked like. My insides, on the other hand, still felt like melted jello. The things we do to sustain the buzz of a great whiskey on a Monday night when you're trying to play wingman for your little brother. Sadly, he didn't get her number. The hot blonde he was talking to before last call. But it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. This was the last thing I can remember telling him before I blacked out. I don't even agree with that. It's about the journey and the destination. Case in point, me. I'd been enjoying the journey so much I had lost all sense of direction, and I was now stuck in a job I couldn't stand. My doorman was MIA. Maybe it was just the time of day. I was rarely home before 10 during the week. It was now 5:30. By the time I stepped out of the elevator onto my floor, the melted jello had turned to just jello. The 5-hour walk had done wonders for my well-being. Maybe I should walk more often. Just as I was getting comfortable into feeling healthy again, I heard a tiny commotion to my right. The doorman, along with several of my neighbors, were all huddled outside of apartment 13. My neighbor, Ruben. The only apartments on the 4th floor were 11 and 13. I was 11. Ruben was 13. Nobody was 12. It was a quirk of my building with a backstory that's not as cool or interesting as you might hope. It stems back to a clerical error on the part of the original property managers. It's cool not to have a 12, so the error was never rectified. Maybe Jerry knows something. I don't know what was more horrifying. The fact that one of my neighbors thought my name was Jerry, as opposed to my real name, Jared, or that I was about to be pulled into whatever nosy neighbor drama was currently occupying the hallway air. Jerry, you have a minute? I took off my headphones and walked over, forcing a tiny smile. Next to the doorman were 3 neighbors, all of whom lived on the floor beneath me. Estelle, Marcia, Renee. All 3 were roughly the same age. Old. Estelle was the oldest. She had to use a walker to get around. Marcia was the belle of Broadway many moons ago. Renee was the most spry. She was the neighbor who constantly put signs up asking people to please sort their trash appropriately. On more than one occasion, she asked me if I knew how to sort trash. Sort you out, I thought. A line I would have killed to say out loud. Instead, I just told her that I did, in fact, know how to sort trash. It was the longest conversation we ever had. I steered clear of my neighbors. They steered clear of me, too. No doubt it was because they were unsure of my ethnicity and therefore felt as if they were lightly walking on eggshells, nervous to imply or assume the wrong judgment. Not judging seemed to be a bridge too far. I could picture them spinning a globe and trying to assess what country I was in fact from. I reveled in their not knowing. The great thing about elder neighbors is you never have to worry about noise control, which apparently was the headline of the conversation I was being dragged into. Renee was ecstatic. So much drama for her to use as a time killer. With our recent uptick in pristine garbage assortment, she was fiending for something exciting to happen in the building. This was it, Renee. Strap in. I could fake a smile as well as anyone. My doorman and the Golden Girls looked at me as if I was a superhero about to fight the final boss. My doorman explained, Ruben has been making a lot of noise today. Marcia and Renee began talking over each other, like hyenas charging towards fresh carcass. I couldn't hear either of them. Estelle just stood there, clenching her walker. The doorman waited for the hyenas to stop chewing so he could actually explain the situation, while I stood there desperately waiting for this to all end so I could go inside and be alone. God bless the doorman for having to put up with their non-stop nitpicking. If you're wondering why I keep referring to him as the doorman and not by his name, yes, it's because I don't remember his name, even though he's been my doorman for well over a year now. The pathetic cherry on the sundae is that there are so many easy ways for me to find out his name, yet I just don't care. But I was still smiling. That had to count for something, right? The doorman looked at me and asked, "Have you spoken to Reuben recently?" "No," I told them. Marcia dove into the conversation like a running back on the 1-yard line. "I could hear him through my ceiling. Can you believe that? My ceiling." Who knew? Marcia's New Yorker accent had never been so pronounced. Anger seems to bring it out. Renee was so excited to chime in, I thought she was going to faint. "Me too. First I thought it was from outside my window, so I looked out the window. Nothing. And then I looked up towards my ceiling. Oh, the noises, Jerry, the noises. He doesn't even live above me. What kind of sense does that make?" "Wow," I said with the enthusiasm of a goldfish. The unnamed doorman asked me a follow-up. "When was the last time you saw Reuben?" "The smell!" Marcia exclaimed. "Ugh!" She was pinching her nose. I couldn't smell this putrid funk through the pungent colognes currently swirling around my nostrils. "You don't smell that, Jerry?" Renee was also pinching her nose as she called me Jerry. This didn't feel like the time to correct her, not so much because the focus was on Reuben, but because it meant I would have to talk to them for an extra 5 seconds, which was a fate worse than death. "No," I finally said. "Jerry," the doorman said, taking a step forward. "Will you mind giving a knock on his door? Maybe he will open if he knows it is you." I prayed for an earthquake, a tsunami, some sort of catastrophic incident to end this whole interaction. I had spent the day waiting to go back to sleep, and now I was being tasked with knocking on a door for someone I had spoke to maybe 3 times for a total of 3 minutes. Reuben was enigmatic, to say the least. I dug that about him. In the rare instance that we crossed paths, we would both smile and nod. I consider myself a fashionable fella, but Reuben had me beat by miles. He dressed like Don Draper. Well-tailored, slim-fitting suits. Rich, muted colors. Charcoal gray, navy, deep brown. Crisp white shirts or light pastel shades, paired with narrow ties that often feature geometric patterns or solid colors. The classic accessories were along for the ride. Leather shoes, watch with the minimalist design, adding a touch of elegance. In the colder weather, he opts for tailored overcoats, often in wool. Classic fedora hat, maybe, completing the classic ensemble. In other words, he looked like how I wanted to look when I was his age. He reminded me of, well, me. Which is not normal, right? You think that about people younger than you, not older than you. Especially not significantly older than you. But there was something about the sly smile and tip of the fedora cap that was both an acknowledgement of my presence and a complete dismissal. He felt hollow in the most glorious way, which is a feeling I had been feeling with increasing frequency over the past decade as I steamrolled through my 30s. Reuben? I guess he was close to 80, but the hallway lighting in my building was like a jazz bar, dimly lit just enough to make you look 25% more attractive. The perfect walkway when bringing a date back to my bachelor pad. When I first moved in, I was a pig in shit. It was my first time being able to live alone. The hyenas made a point of stopping me for multiple chit-chats during the first month. I'm convinced they timed it out so they could feel me out. Their lack of certainty as to what my ethnicity first became apparent, and has given me small doses of entertainment ever since then. Even Estelle chit-chatted me up from the mailroom for nearly an hour. I couldn't tell you one thing about any of those conversations. Reuben? The one neighbor I'd like to know more about? He never said a word. Not once. And I loved him for it. You must smell that, Jerry. Even after being called Jared by the doorman twice within the past 2 minutes, Marcia was still getting my name wrong. I tried to sidestep that by moving towards Reuben's door to give it a knock as if this sweet, stylish, solitary man would open his door for me. Someone who had never spoken to him. But this was the quickest way to escape, so onward I went. waiting. I turned. The Golden Girls and the doorman had not moved. They just stood there, frozen. I shrugged. Renee hit me with the next step, breaking a loud hush. Try again. Louder. And so I did. 3 more knocks. Louder knocks. No response, no noise. But there was a smell. And it was not a good smell. It wasn't specific. It was just foul. There was another ingredient that I couldn't quite sniff out at the moment. I turned back to my SWAT team. They had not budged. I awaited instructions, but they just stood there staring at me, and then it dawned on me. They were waiting on me to give them instructions. So I did something I am not proud of. The last thing I wanted to do, I continued the conversation by asking, what kinds of sounds is he making? Weird. That was the answer from all 3 of the Golden Girls. Marcia, Renee, even Estelle. They all said the sounds coming from Ruben's apartment lately were weird. They couldn't comprehend that I had not heard these sounds at all during the past week. I tried to rationalize out loud and within my inner monologue how I had not heard this yet. All 3 women who had lived on the floor below me had. What time do these sounds occur? I was playing detective. 3 minutes ago, I was about to pass out in my humongous, glorious, life-affirming bed. Yet here I was, Columbo, trying to crack the case that revolved around weird sounds and a sour smell. Marcia and Renee wrestled for the first word. Renee took the high ground and told Marcia to speak first, since she was the first to hear it. Marcia explained that it started 4 nights ago. She woke up in the middle of the night, 2:37 to be exact. At first, she thought it was a neighbor's TV. But then, she followed the sound towards her ceiling, towards Ruben's apartment, above her. The sounds were brief, but loud. The whole thing lasted about 2 minutes. Loud, shrieking, almost like an animal. Renee concurred, saying the same thing happened the next night. Oh, how about you, Estelle? Same thing. I wanted to involve Estelle, not just because she was my favorite Golden Girl, but because I could tell she felt left out, and a little scared, judging by her extra pale face. Estelle took a tiny pause, wiped her nose with a handkerchief, and then said, "Oh, it sounded like a wolf." Good old gummies. My personal trainer was good for more than just training. He also had a weed gummy connection that had come quite in handy lately, seeing as how my ability to sleep well had evaporated. I used to be a great sleeper. I was the friend who could fall asleep anywhere, anytime. And then, it all changed. It started this past summer. I had a long late night with some coworkers. We were celebrating a great pitch that landed us an account with a new drug that promised to cure, nerve damage. You should have seen me in that pitch. Don Draper would have cried his eyes out watching me sell that scam of a pill. They're basically all scams, the pills. This was no different. What was different was that I woke up in Central Park the next morning, in the middle of the woods, with scratches all over my body. The last thing I remembered that night was trying to buy some girl a drink. Cut to me waking up in the woods. Imagine how drunk I must have been walking through the woods in the middle of the night to think that that was the best course of action. What's worse is, that's not the only time I've woken up somewhere unfamiliar. Normally that meant waking up in someone's bed, usually a woman's bed, whose name I don't remember. Once, it was more than one woman. Once, it was a woman and a man. Once, it was just a man. Each time as I walked, via shame out of their respective apartments, houses, or one time an RV, I would tell myself, that's the last time. From here on out, I would clean up my act and be a new, better, more responsible person, and then, like clockwork, 2 weeks later, I would be back to my old tricks, waking up in a place that was not my bed. But at least it was a bed. The woods, a new low. I really tried to clean myself up after that. I stopped drinking for a month, but it didn't help me sleep either. In fact, my sleeping got worse. I would toss and turn all night. I'd wake up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. hence the gummies. I woke up feeling somewhat refreshed, no doubt because of the weed gummies given to me the previous day by my personal trainer. Take one, he told me. So naturally I took two. Babies don't sleep this well. I woke up so refreshed I did a full loop around Central Park, and I was still beaming with energy when I got back. It was the best I had felt in months, until I saw the commotion in the lobby. Estelle, Renee, doorman who remains nameless, and the police. 2 cops, specifically, all huddled around in the lobby, talking. When the Golden Girls saw me, they started to wave me over. "Ah, Jerry, can you believe it?" Estelle said. "Believe what?" I asked. Renee followed up with a question that perplexed her even before the words left her mouth. "You don't know about Ruben?" I froze. Everyone was now staring at me. Instead of telling me right away, they let the silence fill the air. Each microsecond of mystery felt like an hour. Finally, the doorman cleared the air. "Ruben was murdered last night." Damn. Just when I thought I was having a good morning. The cops were very polite. I was sitting on my couch as they sat across from me, holding their tiny notepads, asking questions, making lots of eye contact, talking slowly. They seemed compassionate in a way that the reputation of cops would not line up with. When we were in the lobby, they asked if we could speak somewhere in private, seeing as how I was Ruben's neighbor, his only direct neighbor. I told them as much as I could, which was not much. I tried to be helpful. They stayed relatively vague. When I did ask a question about what happened to Ruben, they said they couldn't discuss that. But should I think of anything helpful, I should give them a call. As I opened the door to let them out, I got another glimpse of the hallway. It was barely perceptible still, just as it was when we had taken the elevator up 15 minutes ago. There was caution tape blocking off the doorway. Occasional flashes from some photo lens, snippets of detective walking around from inside Ruben's apartment. I contemplated getting closer to see if I could get a glimpse of anything, but I knew the answer was no. And what use was I at this point? All I could do was reiterate how unfriendly I was, considering I lived down the hall from this guy for a decent amount of time and knew next to nothing about him. In order to get any intel, I would have to secure it from the other detectives on this case. The Golden Girls. Renee nearly choked from excitement when she saw me standing outside her door. The waffle mix of old lady cologne nearly choked me when I was pulled inside like a fresh piece of white bread being clamped down into a toaster. Marcia and Estelle were sitting around a coffee table, talking 1,000,000 miles per minute. Marcia shot up from her seat when she saw me, while Estelle remained sitting. God bless her brittle soul. "Did the cops say anything?" That was the first question, or more accurately, the only question I heard amongst the tornado of questions being tossed at me from different angles. No, they just asked me if I heard anything, saw anything, knew anything. I felt like Jesus speaking at the Last Supper. Every word was like gospel to the Golden Girls. Even while sipping their gray teas, they never lost eye contact with me. Imagine reaching an age in which the highlight of your day was local gossip, and now one of your neighbors gets murdered? They were clinging to my limited answers as if it were the key to finding the Holy Grail. I was concerned for their health and safety. If I told them something provocative, they might die right there in front of me, and I was not prepared to fill the shoes of the lost sweet soul. Also, this tea was scalding hot, and I was now speaking with a lisp when I told them, who would want to kill Ruben? Renee and Marcia had theories. Estelle just listened. Renee said she had seen Ruben with multiple women over the past couple months. Perhaps it was a jealous lover. Marcia said she heard he liked to gamble. Perhaps it was an upset mobster. Estelle thought it could be supernatural. She had heard ghost stories about this building when she first moved in. I asked the question I'd been craving an answer for, still with full lisp intact. Do we know how he was murdered? All 3 gray-haired queens just shook their gray heads while sipping their gray teas. They seemed unfazed by the boiling temperature and sipped accordingly. For reasons unknown to me, I was now horny, excited by the prospect of reaching my sexual prime in my advancing years. These ladies would faint if they could see the dastardly thoughts spinning around my naughty melon. My phone was beeping constantly. I'd already missed my morning meeting. I told King Douche, aka Carson, that I had to miss the meeting because my neighbor had been murdered. I announced this through Slack. Slack is an app people use for work chats. I should point out that most of the chatting done within the work group chat has nothing to do with actual work. Case in point, right now, in which an avalanche of question marks, oh my god, in all caps, and emojis with wide faces were now littering the Slack chain. The one who had not responded yet was Carson. No doubt his rage of jealousy had reached inferno temperatures, similar to the heat of Renee's tea. I could feel his seething contempt for me having a beyond appropriate excuse for missing this completely inconsequential meeting. I felt like Ferris Bueller, only hornier. Having an epic adventure while all the losers had to play by the rules. The realization that Ruben had been murdered a mere 50 feet from my door seemed to completely evade me. I was brimming with confidence, energy. I haven't felt this good since the first time I did cocaine. Or the second time I did cocaine. Or the third time I'm not proud of my early 30s. Marcia was now snapping for my attention. Literally! Her snaps were so crisp. I had no idea her brittle fingers could make such loud smacks. The snapping sound reverberated through my ears. My hearing seems to have intensified. I was now looking down at my own hands. I was slowly opening and closing them. I could feel the blood coursing through my veins as the cars, honks, and people from the nearby street could now be heard as if they were in the room with us. Damn gummies. Where have you been all my life? He doesn't remember. I didn't know who said that. I didn't really care. I was grooving to my newfound senses and hoping this gummy wave was not intending to crash anytime soon. Remarkable, said another person who evaded my attention span. Truly remarkable, said the last remaining voice. I would have looked up if I wasn't so busy smelling. That's right, smelling. I could smell meat from the inside of Renee's fridge. I could smell the hot dog vendor from across the street. All three Golden Girls' colognes just became a disco dancing all the way up my nostrils. Speaking of dancing, I was in the midst of an electric slide on top of Renee's shag yellow carpeting. I had never actually slid electronically before, at least not sober, when I could see how sexy I was. Hello, dear. That caught my attention. For whatever reason, that was the one that stopped me in my sexy tracks. It was Estelle, standing, without her walker. I had never seen her stand without her walker before. Marcia and Renee were standing on opposite sides of Estelle. All three women were just staring at me. And then Marcia raised a spoon up into the air and began to softly speak, and she took the spoon and slowly swung it from side to side. Was she high too? Their words began to crystallize. Quickly, it sounded like Latin? They were serious. And their eyes? Wow. I must still be high, because their eyes looked black. And then, middle of the woods. Again. At least this time I don't have scratches on my neck and dried blood on my fingertips. My head was pounding. The last thing I remember is grabbing drinks with my team and Carson until it was just me and Carson. Late. Very late. So late that I can kind of remember them asking us to leave and then cut to black, which is how most of my nights had been ending recently. Cutting to black. This is pathetic. Enough is enough. Maybe I need a new everything. New job. New home. Clearly, my current surroundings were only leading me down a very dark path. Oh, great. Carson's bandana. I was holding it in my hand, and it was covered with blood. Shit. Tell me I had not actually lowered myself into a real altercation with King Douche. but that bandana definitely did not come off willingly. I went to the Slack chat. A tsunami of missed messages, all concerning the same thing. Carson had been found murdered in his apartment building? Everyone was asking me what happened after it was just me and him at the bar. They said the cops wanted to speak with me. They were freaking out. 23 missed calls? I wanted to crawl into a hole and die. I sent a message to the Slack chat that I had just woken up and would come into work right away, which was a lie. I had to go home and shower first. For one thing, I did not have shoes. Yes, I was barefoot in the park, which I think is a play. The point is, I looked horrible, beyond tragic, as some might say. I went to my apartment building and was led in by the nameless man who did not make eye contact. He seemed nervous to even be near me. I could sense his trembling. This did not help my crippling insecurity. I could really use the whistle from a construction crewman right now. My shower was long and hot. My skin seemed unaffected by the temperature. Once I got into the shower, I could see the bruises on my back. Deep, purple bruises. I pressed into one of them with my index finger. It didn't hurt. I could barely even feel my own skin. And then it hit me like a bolt of lightning. The gummies! They will save the day. As I dried off in my living room, I was already feeling 20% sexier. Not electric slide sexy, but I was certainly heading in that direction. I heard a knock on the door. I opened it while draped in a towel because porn starts that way sometimes, and I was feeling quite amorous. Hello, ladies. The Golden Girls, back at it, standing in my doorway with big smiles and tiny plates of pastries. I had them make themselves at home, which they were quite adept at. Beyond setting the table, they were also commenting on every single piece of furniture in my apartment. How beautiful it was, how much it could have cost, how it resembled the home of Diane Wiest. Me and Wiest have similar taste? Of course we did. When I finally emerged back into the pastry utopia, fully dressed, ready to impress, and have my second consecutive day of talking to the police in regards to a murdered acquaintance, I could see that the elderly femmes had formed a little triangle in the middle of my living room, with the shades drawn. Is everything okay? I asked, as Estelle stood nearby, without her walker. Her skin seemed softer than usual. All of their skin seemed softer. They seemed vibrant? There was a glow. The golden glow, as it were. Each of them seemed younger, tighter, taller. Estelle was no longer hunched. Even the cleavage was out to play today. Am I horny again? Are the golden gals making me horny? Okay, settle down. No, I'm just hungover. Most people are horny when they're hungover. As the women began to slowly walk towards me, I began to rack my brain for the last time I got laid. If you have to think about it, it's been too long. The women were now all touching my arms. Oh, he still doesn't remember. Remarkable. This time I asked a question. Remember what? Sweetheart, Estelle said while touching my cheek. You look pale. You should really eat before you go off to work. I can't, I told them. It's an emergency. One of my coworkers was killed last night. I have to get going. As I tried to move, I realized their superhuman old woman's strength was keeping me right where I was, as if I had stepped into cement. Darling, Marcia said, you really should eat. Her teeth sparkled, and then I was planted back down into a dining chair. A plate was smoothly placed directly in front of me, and a bib was tucked snugly into my collar. It smelled ravishing. And then breakfast was served. It was Carson's head, sitting atop my finest plate, staring into my eyes. My mouth opened, my body froze. Holy shit, I thought. These gummies are incredible. Eat honey. It's best when it's fresh. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I didn't even speak. I just ate. This isn't the way most people expect to move up the corporate ladder, stepping into a dead man's shoes, whose skull you had eaten that morning for a head-hearty breakfast. But I have to admit, I was feeling good. I spoke with the cops first. Everyone at the office spoke with the cops, mainly about me. Since I was the last one who had been seen with Carson, luckily, there was surveillance footage that showed what happened. Carson was walking home from the bar. He stopped at an ATM, got some money, and then when he stepped outside, a large rabid dog attacked him, ripped out his throat. I wasn't a suspect, as I originally suspected. No, they knew how it happened. The questions revolved around what he had in common with another person who recently had their throat ripped out by a large rabid dog. Reuben.
Never gonna stop this train racing down the line again. Raise your limit, touch the sky. We won't let this moment die. This is the ride, can't resist. In the night, we raise our fists. Feel the power, feel the heat. On the move, we can't be beat. Rhythms calling, hearts ignite as the city comes to life tonight. On the neon we shine bright, holding on, we take this flight. It's a ride, can't resist. In the night